International Master John Watson, and we're going to continue our discussion of the Guimard. You should look back at the last lecture to get introductory material, because I'm going to just start right out. That's the Tarrasch variation of the French defense. This is called the Guimard variation. Notice that it immediately attacks the d4 pawn. We talked about this last time, so I won't go into a lot of detail. But I do want to say a few things about last lecture. And one of them is that I talked about this move very briefly. And it's a move that people might make quite a bit because it's very solid and people might be afraid of your preparation. And they may not know about this move, which moves the pawn for the second time, but puts a lot of pressure on white's center. And also you might notice that black has a knight that's aggressive and forward-looking, and white has a knight that's rather passive and cuts off this bishop. So already after 4 moves, black has a sort of strange initiative. But of course, white has the first move, so white can't really be worse. But let me show you this. It's easy for white to get a bad game. Okay, the normal move is this. You can probably see why if you take a little look at this. Now, white can't go here attacking the queen because that pawn is attacked. So white usually goes here. Black takes the pawn, and now white goes here, trying for a big lead in development. Black simply goes either here or here. And the idea here is, okay, white gets his pawn back, black develops. Now all of a sudden, black's doing fine in development. White castles, black goes here, and black's just going to castle. Very solid. And let's just look at maybe one more move. Okay, this is the main move here. Now if you look at this position for a second, and black's going to play, for example, this move. You hit this isolated pawn. That's the point. This is an isolated pawn. And it can't really advance without causing trouble. Right now it can't advance because you'll take it. But generally, talking about an isolated pawn, there's some rules that you probably know about if you've heard before. One is that black should be blockading it, which he is, so that it can't advance. The other thing is white should be getting good activity. The isolated pawn is a weakness. The rook comes over. There's a problem of just losing that pawn. So basically, white needs compensation for that isolated pawn. And here, he needs active pieces. And here it's kind of funny. Once again, that knight is trouble. It's in the way. It should be here. If it's on that square, it controls these two squares, and it gets ready to play an active move, and suddenly white has a lot of compensation and a lot of activity. But he doesn't. He doesn't because he's got this problem with the knight. So black's probably already better here, and you can check that out for yourself. The other thing I wanted to look at is, real briefly, something we looked at last time. We looked at this move, and we looked mainly at this move. And then we had black play this move. And actually, black got an advantage in most lines because white center is being broken up. And we had no real trouble with any white moves, but there were scary moves. And some people just don't like to play anything that's scary. They want to play solidly. And I just wanted to point out that some even grandmasters are playing, back for a second, are playing this move, simply attacking the bishop. And that's a really important piece to keep, so the bishop retreats. And then black plays here and goes back into a more traditional sort of structure. White gets rid of it, attacks the knight, defends the pawn, black retreats. Now this is a funny position because it's an absolutely normal position for the knight f6 Tarrasch, which is where you play knight f6 on the third move, except that white has an extra move, a complete extra move, bishop e2. But the problem with that is that, say he castles or something. The problem with that is that bishop's not doing very much. So black has a series of normal moves in this kind of position. This, I suppose, is the obvious one, but that's actually quite a good move, too, for strange reasons. And that's a very common move. Often supports this kind of attack. Okay, so what's the point? White's a full tempo ahead, but usually that bishop wants to come back here, because that's where it stands well, and that's where the rook can defend the center. So what's going on here? Let's say the bishop moves here. I'll just make one of these moves. Now we have the position, the exact position that would have happened because white has moved the bishop here, back again, here. That's 3 moves to get back. Black, if you remember right, has moved the knight here, over to here, and then back again. So that's 3 moves. So we're in a normal position. You can look up the theory on this if you want to, but that's a safe way of playing, as opposed to the stuff we looked at last time, which was probably better what we did last time. But if you're a little worried about complications or memorizing things, this is another option you have. Okay, so let's go back to the game I'm going to show you, which is Karapanos versus Nikolaidis. And now we're from the Greek championship, team championship in 2004. What we're going to do is look at other variations that we didn't look at last time. Okay, so white plays there. The only other real move is c3. We just looked at that. And now you're attacking this pawn twice, so once again you play here. This position is going to be reached in this position right here. It's going to be reached in about 90% of your games, certainly 90% of top-level games, just because there isn't that much choice, because black keeps attacking things. Okay, now in this game, he plays c3 now. A little bit of a difference here, because for one thing, there's no move like that. And for another thing, black has to commit to some sort of structure here to decide what he's kind of trying to do. So in this game, he attacks immediately. And remember, that's the point. We don't attack the base of the pawn chain or this part. We attack the front of the pawn chain, and that's very typical of modern chess. Okay, so he does that, attacks 3 times. So black very naturally doesn't want to lose the pawn, so he captures. And now we looked at this kind of capture last time in the last lecture. You can also take with the knight. This is not a bad move because you simply reorganize. You play here, attack that square, castle, get a nice file, and play from there. And we saw one game like that last week. But this time, though, he takes the queen in order to put 3 pieces on that square, and maybe 4 pieces. So he's really going to try and advance with this move, e5. White develops. Now, what's white trying to do? Stop e5, or at least stop e5 from being effective by pinning along that square. So one of these 2 knights is not effective in supporting e5. So it would be very risky at least to play e5 right now. So black simply develops, white develops, black develops. Black has interesting pressure here. White has a backward to think about, maybe rook over. And he's got this idea of playing here maybe, although right now that would just strengthen black's center. Okay, white plays there. Now here we go again. That knight doesn't have a good square to go to. The knight would like to stay in the center, controlling some of these squares, but the knight is blocking off that bishop. So it has to go somewhere in order to make any sort of progress or in order to really put any pressure, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Now black plays e5 anyway, which is the move white was trying to prevent. Well, this move frees this. We've seen all this last week. If you want to see general ideas, go back to my last lecture. But the point is, once black gets this move in, he's doing really well, usually, if there isn't a tactical problem. And this is what white was counting on, is that in this position, well, he doesn't want to get hit with double pawns. So in this position, he's going to take once. And then, look, if he plays check, which is the obvious move, black can simply defend. And he's going to get tremendous activity. White is going to take. Black is going to play probably here, hitting this bishop indirectly. White is going to play here. And it turns out that in this position, black has a great attack. In fact, a winning attack. And you can see maybe why. This queen's stuck over there. This bishop's sort of hanging. There's really nothing to defend the king side. And black has this attack, this attack, this attack, and the knight well placed. So it turns out that this move is really winning, check, because he has to take it. And at this point, I think there are probably 2 moves here, which are good. The main one is probably just queen here. That's the easiest way to win, actually. Attacking that's checkmate over there. And so, at this point, it's almost impossible to do anything about that. Probably, white would try to play something like here to make an escape square. And then, black could play, make sure about this. Okay, here's a nice move. Rook takes, and then queen takes, and then the idea is check, king runs over, and check, and you just won the queen. Notice that that's defended, and the queen's attacked. So that's a nice little line to show you how strong black's attack can be if white grabs this pawn. It's just too dangerous to grab that pawn, so grandmasters don't usually do things like that. So he attacks the knight retreats, and he plays the bishop out. Good, developing. So this makes a lot of sense. But now at least black's managed to defend his center, and he's got all his pawns out, and his pieces are free. So things are going pretty well, but white's got his pieces out too. It's not the end of the world. It's just a game. Black plays there. That's a cute move. Covers some really important squares. Knight g4 could be played. Knight f5 can be played. White attacks the queen. The queen runs over to the king side. It's getting a little dangerous over here. This move weakened the king side. There's some problems on h2. Okay, he attacks the queen, defends the square. Now there's this issue with the light squares, these kind of squares. And so, really, this is becoming sort of a serious attack. Black would like to play bishop g4 and maybe bring over the other rook to the center. White's developed, but this piece is a little out of place, and there's some kind of weak squares here. Even that's a little weak. Black doesn't seem to have similar problems. His position is very solid. Okay, so white moves there. Black goes ahead and attacks the queen, and the queen moves up. Very good, defending here, very safe. Black plays back. Black is saying, okay, I'm not going to mate you quite yet, but he does clear a square for the knight, and more importantly, he tries to get rid of that bishop. We talked a little about bad bishops. Most of you probably know all about this, but a bishop is defined by where the center pawns are. And in this case, black's center pawn is on a light square. So this bishop is somewhat restricted by these pawns. It may not look like it, but it has some problems. So he wants to get rid of this bishop because that's white's good bishop. That's the one with a lot of scope. So that's one of the reasons for playing bishop f5. White doesn't want to do that, doesn't want to get rid of his good bishop. He gains a tempo by attacking the queen. Queen goes back. Now he wants to get rid of black's good bishop. The good bishop is the one which isn't blocked by the pawns in the center. So white is doing a good thing here. Black just simply defends, and white takes the pawn. Now, that's very greedy. Already, this side of the board is very shaky. This whole, he only has really one defender going this way, and there are holes in the position. So black plays this move. And that's an instructive move, because a lot of times when you have all your pieces on pretty much perfect squares, you know, open file, beautiful bishop, all these squares are very active. You need a pawn push to actually break through, to actually manage to attack effectively. So now he's opened up another line, which is this line here. Things are getting very, very dangerous. And every piece is attacking now. White is still trying to exchange this bishop. Okay, there he goes attacking. Now this is a big problem. Rook here, and then checkmates all over the place. So this is becoming very serious. White comes back. Unfortunately, that really doesn't stop the attack. Now he's attacking everything. He's attacking the bishop. He's attacking that. So white really has to do something. Now if white simply recaptures here, like this, there's checkmate here. So that's the point of bishop takes g3. And this is sort of typical of what's going on when your pieces abandon the king side. Okay, so he takes that in order to be able to take this bishop and then not get checkmated. Black plays check anyway, and now if the king moves, maybe here, you get a checkmate. So really white has to take that, and in fact he resigns, because there's, excuse me, that's not true. He makes one more move or two, let me see. Yeah, he takes that thinking, well, at least I'll try to get some material for my queen, but after that he suddenly realizes, no, I'm getting checkmated anyway. Yeah, if I take that. That's simply checkmate. So black sort of blasted through there, and it wasn't completely because of the opening, but it was a good illustration of how things can go. That black had a very easy game. Let me just show you that again. Black had a very easy game here once he got that move in. That opened up all his pieces, and he had no problems after that. He's got a lot of dynamism. This piece ended up being critical. So you can see sort of the basic structure of what black's trying to do. He attacks the pawn chain like this. Remember, you attack the front of the pawn chain breaks down, and then this move is made to free this bishop and his other pieces. Basic Guimard sort of thing. Okay, so let's check out another game here. Okay, now I'm going to show you a game, Lobran-Drasko, Sarajevo, 1984, and not surprisingly, it's a Guimard. There we go. Attack that D pawn. Remember, it's all with attack. That's why it's easy to kind of get the same position every time. Attack twice. What's white going to do? Okay, we're in this basic position again. Now white makes what looks like a passive move, but in fact, this is the move that almost drove the Guimard out of business originally. This is a very old move that really gave black trouble, and a lot of people didn't want to play. This is before the Guimard got really popular. Now I think people have solutions to this, but it's still a pretty good line. So black has to be careful. So in this game, he just develops. The old line here, the one that really gave black some problems eventually, although it's not necessarily bad, is you just try to attack the center like you always do. Okay? And white takes. Black takes. And now this kind of crazy move. Now white's falling behind it. That's a very strange move. White's falling behind in development, but he is opening up this bishop. And the main point here is that if black tries to break with a move that looks very attractive, white actually plays here. And that's the point of that knight move, threatening this. And it turns out it's very hard to stop that. He's also threatening this move, attacking the queen. So black can win a piece by attacking this. White takes, otherwise black just has a good game. Black goes here, and all of a sudden there are two pieces attacked. And this is very ancient theory. White can play c4, but the most dangerous move is bishop c4. Now, since white's a pawn up, black just has to win his piece back. And then the idea is that this move is a problem. So that's difficult. That's very hard to play. You can see white's whole position, black's whole position is open here. And this is a very dangerous move here. So that's one thing that really hurt black for a long time in these positions, until recently, and even that position you can maybe survive, but it's no fun. So now black tends to make solid moves like that, and just say, well, that's a fairly passive move, I'm in no big hurry. I'll play that f6 move anyway, but I'll wait. Okay, so white does the same thing we just talked about, but now black's a little better prepared for it, because when white takes, black simply takes back, and now there's no tricks. But black still has the idea of maybe trying to get that move in. He also has a nice square here. And white's pieces are a little funny. This knight here is blocking the bishop off. So black's really doing fine here. Nothing special, but he's doing fine. Okay, now notice he's willing to waste a move. Why? Because again, that's the big move. If he gets that in, he's pretty happy. So white tries to stop that, basically. He says, look, if you try to make that move, I'm gonna win this pawn, maybe even with tempo. So it's going to be very scary at least to do that. Now this is a key move. What's he trying to do? Well, one thing he's trying to do is just stop this move, driving away his bishop. And the second thing he's trying to do, as you might have probably noticed, is he's trying to put the bishop there, because it's blocked off right now by the pawn. So he's got a new strategy. Put the bishop on b7, and it's got this beautiful long diagonal. Okay, so white makes a very logical move. He intends, if black takes here, to take back with the pawn and have a big pawn center. But more importantly, he wants to get his bishop out and attack that square. So black makes a funny move. Partly it's sort of just reorganization, but you'll see why in a second. This piece isn't that great over here anyway, so he wants to move it towards the king side and maybe even prepare a counterattack. White develops, black develops. Now see, there's always an issue now that he might end up taking that, and that he might have this bishop aiming at the king. But once again, he's got some ambitions about playing against the king. Okay, so white plays rook c1. Now, black, instead of that, white could try to play a little more aggressively. And then you might think, well, why doesn't he just play something like this? Nice aggressive move. It stops e5 for pretty much forever. And the question is that how's black going to react to something like this? And he has to react fairly aggressively. He plays this with the idea of opening up that bishop. And if white plays this to cover that square, because if white plays any other move, maybe this, for example, which looks pretty good, nice attacking move, he's going to lose this square, and guess what? It's an isolated pawn again. Well, what does he have for the isolated pawn? He's got a bad bishop, and really doesn't have all that much activity. Black's very well set up. He's got the blockading square defended, and his other pieces are pretty good. Nice active rook. And really, white wouldn't really want to do this. So you might say, okay, why not stop that isolated pawn? But then black's going to take here, white's going to take here, and if you look at this, I'm just trying to think whether he takes the queen off or not. It probably doesn't matter much. Black can play a move like this, and he's going to put his knight here. Just make a move here. And if you look at this, white's pawns are all messed up. that's isolated, and it's blockaded already, and the bishop is running into its own pawn. And black's bishop is very good. This kind of position is very easy to play. Maybe a rook comes over, the queen moves, say, maybe over here. And black's pieces are well placed. And white's pieces, there's some question about what they're doing. Simplification is going to really help black here because a long-term advantage against that isolated pawn. And this bishop's not very good, is it? It's running into its own pawn. This bishop's running into its own pawn. So the knights are doing better than the bishops in this position. Okay, so let's go back to the game. So basically what we just looked at is what happens if white allows black to take. For example, if he plays here, we just looked at this line just to give you an idea. That was kind of fast. The idea was that if he plays this, you're going to break open the pawns and leave that isolated. And the idea is if he plays a natural move, like this, then you can blockade that isolated pawn. And when you blockade an isolated pawn, there's always some chance that it's in trouble, especially if white isn't too active. And one of white's pieces that isn't very active is this bishop. It's running into its own pawn. That's just to review that. Go back to the game. Okay, again, so that's why white played that. He's thinking about just driving that bishop away. It's very interesting. That move covers that square so that white can't advance that because black has 3 on it. But he could also, at this point, he could make a move like this and just challenge the center because he has his own share of the center now, and white's pieces are not particularly impressive. Okay, instead, black plays here, stopping c5. White sort of just sets up some pieces. Black plays there. Once again, c5 was a quite possible move, really quite a good move. But black's got his eye on the king side, and this is very interesting. White really wants to prevent this move, but in doing so, he weakens what? The long diagonal. So that could be a problem later. Okay, black just simply develops. White decides finally to take that and open up this file. Maybe there's not much of another plan. Black takes back. A little bit of a threat down this file now. Now finally white plays that move that he's been thinking about playing. And the idea is that if black takes a bunch of times here, white's going to be on this pawn. So let's just see how that goes. Now he doesn't let him capture this pawn. He simply defends it. So, you know, it's an interesting game. Both sides have their advantages, but that's a little bit weak. He's threatening knight takes pawn. I prefer black. He has more open lines, and once again, this bishop is sort of stuck behind its own pawn. So let's just keep going. Good move. He's just deciding, I'm not in great shape, I'm not in great shape, I'm going to drive that knight away, and black gets dynamic. He's going to try to take this knight with tempo. And the problem is there's moves like this, too, and the bishop's free. So white does the best of a bad job here. He takes the knight. And now, well, let's just go and move. He tries to attack this pawn. And black trades a pair of rooks. And black takes that pawn. Now, this is still an isolated pawn. And black has a nice file. White really doesn't have as much activity as black does. The king's in a little bit of trouble. Very open position over here. But something very interesting happens here, which is that this knight is right in front of the isolated pawn, perfectly placed, covering all these great squares. But look what happens. This is called trading advantages. Now the knight gives a fork and gets rid of a bishop that really isn't that bad. In other words, white's bishop is pretty bad, and yet the knight was very good. The problem is that he's still on this now, and there's really no way to defend it. So it's a tactical point. It's no longer positional. Okay, now there are mate threats down here. And white thinks he's sort of got those covered. He plays check, king over. Now notice there's no more mates or nothing special going on. And probably at this point, he probably thought he could just play check. Let's just see what he did play. Well, okay, he played this move. He did, play check. And now it looks like, oh, he's starting to get checkmate. Maybe he can get the queens off the board, and there goes the attack. Well, there's a problem, because if white takes this queen now, black takes, and whoops, that's it, checkmate. No way of stopping it. So even with the queens off, white's not got what he wanted. And in fact, so he takes the bishop. And again, that looks good. Divert the attack. The problem is, so it's all very well calculated. And that wins the queen. In fact, just wins the game. So he tries to desperately make one more move, and then that's it. If the queen is pinned, that's checkmate. Okay, so that's a typical game. Once again, let me just go back here to show you the very beginning of that game. Okay, there's the Guimard. What we looked at here was instead of attacking the base immediately, black got developed first. Okay, now black's got his pieces out, he's hitting e5, and he got his bishop on the long diagonal, and that worked out pretty well. Okay, thanks very much for listening to that lecture, and we'll get another one real soon.